we hoped a better life, freedom and democracy after World War II. And it started that way, immediately after the war. But then the Communist Party, which was a tiny minority at the beginning, with the Soviet military backup, gradually took over. They simply killed out all the other political parties, and they took full control of the country. And that turned me against the system. So in spite of being in a good position as an architect, I felt against the system, and I was not alone. Everybody else felt more or less the same way, and inner resistance in the society against the communist Stalinist system grew. So by 1956, the country was ready to revolt, and I was part of it. I was in the demonstrations. Then when it became bloody, I got weapons, and I was fighting with the youngsters, because that was a revolution of the young people, very interestingly. The Stalinist system built up such a suppressive system in spying and reporting that nobody trusted anybody anymore. We had no friends anymore. Nobody came to the house. Parents didn't dare to talk to their own children, because they were indoctrinated in the school, and the children were supposed to spy against their parents. So it was a terrible situation, and we just did not know what happened in the minds of the young generation. And then came the revolution, and the big surprise that all the young people turned against the system, not because they learned it from their parents. It came from the human soul, that they knew that this was all a lie, a system of lies. I was the oldest during the revolution. Wherever I went, I moved from one group to the other, wherever the fight was heavier. And at 32, I was already the oldest. The average age of the revolutionaries was 18 years, but it started with 14. We did not let anybody under 16 to have a weapon, but they said, the 14 years old said, I am 16, and I get the weapon. So it was a surprise for all of us, and it was so uniform, so overly occupying the minds of the people, and it became such an explosion of position against the Soviet system that nobody defended the system. It was not a civil war. It was not a war between even the population and the military, let's say, because the military did not support the Soviet system anymore. The police, the Budapest police immediately disarmed. We got their weaponry. The military gave us their submachine guns and their rifles and so on. That's how the revolutionaries got the weaponry. The young children learned at school in paramilitary education how to fight guerrilla wars, and the system meant that this will be a source of communist fighters. The opposite happened. Whatever they learned there turned against the communist system. The Molotov cocktail was a communist idea, and we turned it against them. And all kinds of tricks, how to slow down a tank on the street. How do you slow them down. You smear the pavement with soap, and it becomes so slippery that the caterpillar cannot advance, so it stops, and then comes the Molotov cocktail and burns the tank, attacking it at a certain point, so it has to be a quiet moment, and then it just goes into flames. The soldiers jump out, and the children revolutionaries, the boys, did not kill any Soviet soldier. We did not hate the Russians. We captured them. They became prisoners. And interestingly, when we interviewed the prisoners, they said that they believed they were in Egypt, and the Danube was the Suez Canal. They were going to go to Suez to fight. And then when the Hungarian Revolution broke out, they were reoriented to Hungary.
I remember well, I was in Hungary, 1956. There was a Stalin death statue, and they take down the statue with a hammer and some tools, and he was very, very happy. And it was the time the statue parts when it was down in the floor. It was about 8, 9 o'clock evening.
Yes, we talk about two phases of the revolution, like two acts. Act 1 started with the demonstrations on October 26, that continued all day and all night, and later at night the secret police started shooting at us, and that was the beginning of the fight. And that fight grew and spread all over the country and resulted in a total Soviet defeat, military defeat, which they did not expect. So the Soviet Union withdrew from Hungary physically in late October. By October 30, there was no Soviet troop in Hungary except in the very east part, but they were facing home into Romania and Soviet Ukraine. And on November 4, there came the second Soviet attack, which was very strong, oversized militarily, and crushed the revolution. Now, the revolution created a new government that was representative of all the democratic parties that existed before the takeover. And there was peace in Hungary, and we were ready for the new life. And then, as a surprise, came the attack in the early hours of November 4, and that was Act 2. We responded it, but it was a hopeless fight, and only the West could have helped. And it prolonged because we never gave up that there will be a Western help, and it never came. So that's how we divide the short history of the revolution into two phases, and that's why we talk about the second Soviet attack.
Okay. That's it.
I was familiar with the area. You know, I spent some time in Beijing, so I knew what that square meant, and it was so close to the center of the power of China, and we watched the demonstrations, we knew that Gorbachev was there at that time, so that added to the importance. We don't hear about it, but that was part of the collapse of the Soviet Union, of the Soviet system, even during Gorbachev. So I saw personally the same thing happening in China, among the young generation of China, what happened in Hungary earlier. And I felt total sympathy with them, and I loved all those youngsters as one of my brothers and sisters. Well, I hoped that there will be no intervention because there was no another country outside, like the big Soviet Union against the small Hungary, but it was within China. And we saw some expressions of sympathy among some of the communist leaders and some of the military leaders who did not want to intervene. So it was somewhat different, and I really hope that there will be no return of the Communist Party rule.